Celeste Monroe had already written the check in her head before she ever set foot on the sand. $240 million. A luxury eco-resort on the most pristine stretch of coastline along the Gulf of Mexico. All she needed was confirmation one local guide to point her toward the most beautiful beach, shake hands, and step aside. Instead, she got Malik Dawson, a quiet black man with calloused hands, a little girl whose asthma treatments he paid for on a tour guide's salary, and an unsettling habit of refusing to answer direct questions. He didn't take her to the most beautiful beach. He took her somewhere she was never supposed to see. And when the tide finally pulled back when she stood at the edge of a quietly recovering coral reef and understood what he had been protecting all along, everything she thought she knew about this project began to fall apart. If you're new here, stories like this one come out every week. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now let's get into it. Celeste Monroe arrived in Tidewater Point on a Tuesday morning with a carry-on that cost more than most people's monthly rent and a 12-page briefing document she had already read 3 times on the flight down from New York. 2 assistants had flown in the day before to handle logistics, hotel arrangements, vehicle rentals, the county liaison meeting scheduled for Thursday, so that by the time Celeste landed, the only thing left for her to do was the work itself. That was how she preferred it. The town was small, a few hundred permanent residents, a handful of fishing boats still going out before dawn, a main street anchored by a bait shop, a diner, and a real estate office that had recently updated its window display with artist renderings of what the coastline could become. Someone had clearly gotten word that Monroe Capital Group was coming. Celeste didn't mind the eagerness. She was used to it. Every coastal town with a struggling economy wanted to be the next destination. Her job was to find the ones that actually had what it took: the right light, the right sand, the right kind of silence that wealthy people paid enormous sums of money to rent for a week and turn potential into product. She had been doing exactly that for 11 years. She had not been wrong yet. Dominic Hale was already at the hotel bar when she arrived, a coffee in one hand and a tablet propped against a water glass, scrolling through satellite imagery of the coastline. He had flown in the night before. That was Dominic, always a step ahead, always with the data already sorted and ready before Celeste had even touched down. "Tell me something good," she said, dropping her bag onto the stool beside him. "3 viable sites along the northern shore," he said without looking up. 2 of them we already knew about from the county survey. The third one, he turned the tablet toward her. "I pulled it this morning from aerial archives. Local fishermen call it Blue Mirror Cove. No public access trail on record, no tourism infrastructure, no development permits ever filed." He paused. "Which means no one has touched it. Even from a satellite photograph, the water was an impossible shade of turquoise, the kind that showed up in travel magazine spreads and made people reach for their credit cards before they had finished reading the caption. "How does the investment math work if we center the resort there?" she asked. "I ran the preliminary numbers." He finally looked up. "Value roughly doubles compared to either of the 2 alternative sites, maybe more depending on how the environmental review lands." Celeste studied the image. "Get me a guide who knows that cove." Dominic slid a business card across the bar without a word. Handwritten on the back in his precise, small print, Malik Dawson. Best in the area, knows this water better than anyone. Malik Dawson was waiting outside the hotel at 7 the next morning in a faded navy shirt and worn work boots, a thermos of coffee in one hand, and a tide chart folded into his back pocket. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of unhurried stillness that could read as either calm or indifference, depending entirely on how much patience you had. Celeste, who had approximately none before her second coffee, decided within 30 seconds that he was going to be difficult. She extended her hand. "Celeste Monroe, I appreciate you making time." He shook it once, firmly. "Malik Dawson." He glanced at Dominic, standing a half step behind her, then looked back at her. "You said on the phone it was just the 2 of us." "Mr. Hale is my VP of strategy. He'll be joining us on the water." "I charge per person," Malik said simply. Dominic smiled the way he always smiled when someone mildly inconvenienced him. patient, smooth, carrying the faint suggestion that he was tolerating something he didn't have to. "That's fine, whatever the rate is." Malik didn't respond to the smile. He turned and walked toward the dock. Celeste followed, reminding herself that she had been told this man knew the water better than anyone in the county. She held on to that. The first morning was, by her standards, productive. Malik brought them along the northern shoreline at low speed, pointing out landmarks, explaining tidal behavior, describing the way the light moved across different stretches of beach at different hours. He answered her questions about road access, seasonal storm exposure, and shoreline erosion with the kind of precision that made immediately clear why people paid specifically for him. He didn't guess. Every answer was grounded in something real and observed, not estimated. But when she asked about Blue Mirror Cove offhandedly as if it were just one item on a longer list, something in his bearing shifted. "That area," Malik said, eyes staying on the water ahead of them, "it's not suitable for tourism development." Celeste waited for more. Nothing came. "Could you be more specific?" she said. "Access is difficult. The tidal patterns are unpredictable. It's not a good fit for what you're describing." She looked at Dominic. He gave her the smallest shrug, a look she had learned to read precisely over 8 years working beside him. "Let it go for now. We'll come back to it." She let it go. That evening, Dominic spread the satellite images across the table in their hotel conference room and said what he always said when a situation hadn't resolved the way he intended. He told her what it meant. "He's protecting something," Dominic said. "Not as a theory, as a conclusion already reached and simply being announced. Or the access genuinely is difficult and he's being conservative," Celeste said. She believed it less than she sounded. "Satellite shows calm, shallow water with no significant rock obstruction at low tide. The access issue he described isn't geographical." Dominic tapped the image. "I looked into him this afternoon. Dawson has been a documented opponent of 2 previous development proposals in this county. Both times he helped coordinate local resistance that stalled the environmental review process long enough for the permits to lapse. He's not a cautious guide. He's someone who took your money to slow you down." Celeste was quiet for a moment. She looked at the photograph, the color of that water, the smooth, shallow basin of it, the way the surrounding bluffs would frame a property in a way no architect could improve upon. "If we center the resort at Blue Mirror Cove," she said, "what are we actually looking at?" Dominic had already run those numbers too. He always had. Return on investment accelerates by 30 to 38% in the first 5 years compared to either alternative site. The visual profile alone makes it a flagship property, the kind of images that appear on the cover of a major travel publication. Our current partners will respond immediately. New ones will approach us. Celeste nodded once. She had made harder calls than this. "Then we need to see it." She gave Malik the ultimatum the next morning before he had finished his first cup of coffee. "Blue Mirror Cove," she said. "Tomorrow. You take me there or I find someone who will. And if I find another guide, you're done on this project completely." Malik set his thermos on the dock railing. He looked at her without anger or surprise, with something slower and harder to read than either of those things. Then he looked past her out toward the water. "I'll take you," he said finally. "But just you." He did not look at Dominic when he said it. "Not him." Dominic started to speak. Celeste raised one hand without turning around. "Fine," she said. "Just me." Dominic said nothing further, but as Malik turned and walked back down the dock, Celeste caught the expression on Dominic's face. The particular stillness that meant he was already working past this conversation, already 3 moves ahead of wherever they currently were. That evening, Malik was crouched on the dock checking the outboard motor when he heard footsteps on the weathered planking. He didn't need to look up to know who it was. The shoes were too clean and too quiet for anyone local. "Mr. Dawson." Dominic stopped a few feet away and leaned against a dock piling, hands in his jacket pockets. Relaxed. Practiced. "Mr. Hale," Malik said without stopping what he was doing. "I wanted to clear something up before tomorrow," Dominic said. "I know you have concerns about large-scale development in this area, and I want you to know that Monroe Capital takes those concerns seriously. Celeste is genuinely committed to sustainable tourism that's not just language we put in the brochure. Malik turned a wrench, said nothing. What I'm saying, Dominic continued, his voice staying even and reasonable, is that this project is going to move forward. The county has already indicated its support. We have pre-clearance on 2 of the 3 sites. The only real question at this point is whether the people who live here have a meaningful voice in what gets built. Your cooperation tomorrow could go a long way toward making sure the right people are at the table when those decisions get made. Malik set the wrench down and looked at him directly for the first time. That's a very smooth way of saying you're going ahead no matter what I do, he said. Dominic smiled the same patient, polished smile from the morning before. I'm saying your participation matters. What you're saying, Malik said quietly, is that you want me to open the door. Dominic didn't answer that. He straightened up, gave a single nod, and walked back down the dock without hurrying. Malik watched him go. Then he looked out at the dark water, at the thin line where the gulf met the sky, barely visible now in the last of the evening light. He had made himself a promise 6 years ago, the spring after his wife died. He had looked at Leora, 3 years old, asleep in the backseat of his truck outside the hospital, and he had decided that the one thing he could still do, the one thing that connected him to the work she had cared about most, was protect what she had spent the last 2 years of her life trying to bring back. He had kept that promise through 2 development proposals, through the legal threats, through the mornings when the medical invoices stacked up on the kitchen counter and he couldn't see past them. He thought about Leora's breathing last week, the way it had woken him at 2 in the morning, the specific sound of it, the tight, effortful sound that he had learned to monitor the way other fathers monitored the weather. He thought about the invoice in the kitchen drawer that he had tucked face down and not looked at since it arrived. There was no version of this that didn't cost him something. But one thing had become clear after tonight's conversation. Celeste Monroe and Dominic Hale were not the same. They had arrived at the same project from different places, and they would not necessarily end up in the same place either. Dominic had walked down to this dock in the dark alone to manage him. Celeste had stood on the dock in the morning light and told him directly what she needed and looked him in the eye when she said it. That didn't make her right. It didn't mean she would choose differently when it mattered, but it meant she was worth the risk of an honest conversation. Tomorrow at low tide, he would take her to Blue Mirror Cove. He would take her the long way through the mangroves and the tidal mud and the broken remnants of what the cove had looked like before. He would let her see what was underneath the water when the water finally pulled back. After that, it would be her choice. He picked up the wrench and went back to work. The path Malik chose did not appear on any tourism map. It began at a public beach access point at the south end of town, a narrow gap between 2 chain-link fences that most visitors walked past without noticing, and descended almost immediately into a stretch of mangrove forest that swallowed the light within 30 feet of the entrance. The ground was root-crossed and uneven, the air thick and brackish, the kind of smell that came from things decomposing slowly in salt water and doing so productively. Celeste had worn the wrong shoes. She registered this without complaint and said nothing. Malik moved through it without effort or hesitation, which told her he had made this walk more times than he could count. He carried a canvas bag over one shoulder and used a short wooden staff, more habit than necessity, to test the ground ahead at the muddier sections. He didn't offer a hand. She didn't ask for one. For the first 20 minutes, neither of them spoke. The silence was not comfortable. It had texture and weight to it, the kind of silence that accumulated between 2 people who had agreed to a temporary truce and were each privately uncertain about its terms. Celeste filled it the way she filled most silences she couldn't control with work. She sent 3 messages on her phone, checked the preliminary environmental review timeline that Dominic had filed with the county, and scrolled through the hotel's meeting agenda for the following week. Then she looked up and realized that the cell signal had disappeared, and her phone had been showing her a frozen screen for the last several minutes. She put it away. The forest opened onto a rocky outcropping that curved along the coastline, exposed and windswept, the stone underfoot dark, and worn smooth by decades of wave action. The gulf stretched out to the left of them, enormous and gray-green in the early morning light, moving in the slow, heavy way it moved before the heat of the day settled in. To the right, the rocks formed a low, natural wall that sheltered a narrow walking corridor between stone and scrub. It was along this corridor that the evidence began. Celeste noticed the first piece almost accidentally. A fragment of nylon netting faded to near colorlessness, wedged into a crack in the rock. Then a plastic bottle half buried in a pocket of sand between two boulders. Then, as the path curved and the view opened further, she saw them more clearly. The remnants of what had once been a working and well-visited stretch of water. The rusted iron ring of an old mooring post. The waterlogged stump of what had been a dock piling, its top surface eroded to a soft, fibrous mass. A cluster of sun-bleached coral fragments, the chalky white of bone, gathered against the base of a rock formation as if they had washed there and been left. Malik did not pause at any of these things, but he bent without breaking stride to pick up the plastic bottle and drop it into his canvas bag. Then the net fragment. Then a cigarette butt from a crevice in the stone. He did not comment. He did not explain. He simply did it quietly and without ceremony, the way a person does something they have done so many times that it has become reflex. Celeste watched him and said nothing. Her phone buzzed with a delayed notification as a brief signal appeared. She glanced at it. A message from Dominic time-stamped 40 minutes ago. Board is asking for an update. I'm sending them a preview of the Blue Mirror Cove site analysis this morning. Just 3 members gauge reaction. We'll have the full revised deck ready tonight. Don't worry, I've got this handled. She stopped walking. She typed back immediately. Do not send anything to the board until we've spoken. Wait for my call. She watched the sending indicator spin. The signal dropped before the message delivered. She stared at the screen for a moment, then put the phone in her pocket and kept walking. She would deal with it when they were back in range. How much further? She asked. 20 minutes. Malik said. Less once we clear the rocks. What was this area like before? He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then, busy. Charter boats, 3 or 4 of them running twice a day through the summer. 2 dive operators work in the cove directly. A guy who ran a floating bar on a barge on weekends. He paused. Popular. That's what they called it. A hidden gem. What happened? What always happens, he said, when something people call a hidden gem stops being hidden. He didn't elaborate. Celeste didn't push. She walked and she watched the water to her left, and she let that answer settle into her at whatever pace it chose. They reached Blue Mirror Cove 40 minutes after they had set out, emerging from the rocky corridor onto a broad, flat shelf of pale limestone that sloped gently into the water. The tide was out well out further than it went on most mornings, as if the timing had been deliberate, as if Malik had not brought her here at low tide by accident. Celeste stopped walking. The water was at most 4 feet deep across the entire interior of the cove, and it was clear in the way that very few things in the natural world are actually clear. Not transparent like glass, which has a color of its own, but clear, the way air is clear, so that looking into it was simply looking without any medium in between. She could see the bottom as precisely as she could see the stone beneath her feet. She could see the sand, the shape of it, the fine striations made by current and tide. She could see the rock formations on the floor of the cove, and growing from those rocks, slowly, unevenly, in clusters that ranged from the size of her palm to the size of a small shrub, she could see coral. Not the white, calcified, dead coral she had seen along the path. Living coral. The kind that had color pale gold, soft lavender, a dusty rose. The kind that moved slightly in the movement of water, even this shallow. Small fish drifted between the formations, translucent, purposeful, going about their business with the indifference of creatures in an undisturbed place. She stood at the edge of the limestone shelf and looked at it and said nothing for a long time. My wife started this, Malik said from beside her. He had set down his bag and was standing with his arms at his sides, looking out at the cove with an expression that was not quite grief and not quite peace, but occupied the space between them. Not alone, there were 6 of them at the beginning, local people who had watched this place die over about 5 years and decided to try to bring it back. They built the first restoration frames by hand, drove stakes into the sand at low tide, attached coral fragments from healthy reefs up the coast. He was quiet for a moment. It takes about 3 years to know if a fragment is going to survive. She died in the second year. She didn't get to find out. Celeste looked at the cove. "It survived," she said. "Parts of it did." He crouched at the edge of the shelf, looking down through the water at a cluster of coral about 2 feet below the surface. The branching staghorn in the northeast quadrant is the healthiest section. That's almost entirely her work and the 2 people she trained before she got sick. The other sections are newer, started by people who heard what they were doing and wanted to help. It's been 6 years now. He looked up at her. If a commercial vessel runs a propeller through this cove even once at the wrong depth, that's a decade of recovery gone. Not damaged, gone. Celeste looked at him. She thought about Dominic's satellite photograph, those impossible turquoise coordinates on a screen in a hotel bar at 7 in the morning. She thought about the phrase he had used without hesitation. Value roughly doubles. She thought about the message she had sent him that was still sitting unsent in her outbox. "I didn't tell anyone about this place," she said. "I want you to know that." Malik looked at her steadily. "I know," he said. "You're not who I'm worried about." They took a different route back, longer but easier walking. And by the time they reached the edge of town, the morning had opened into full heat. Celeste's shoes were ruined. She didn't particularly care. Her phone found a signal the moment they cleared the tree line. The message she had sent Dominic showed a delivered timestamp, but it had arrived 14 minutes after a second message from him. Sent the preview to 3 board members this morning as planned. Early reaction is strong. More tonight. He had sent it before her message reached him. But looking at the timestamp, she understood that even if it had arrived in time, she was not certain it would have stopped him. He had described it as planned, meaning he had decided before she woke up, before she had walked a single step toward the cove, that this was already a settled matter. She was reading the message when Malik, walking beside her, stopped. She stopped too. From the direction of the marina, a drone was descending, a commercial-grade unit larger than a recreational model, the kind used for professional video production. It was carrying a camera. It was moving in the direction of the coastline, in the direction specifically of the southern rocky corridor and the cove beyond. She called Dominic. He answered on the second ring, unhurried. "The drone," she said. "Background footage," he said. "Visual material to go with the deck tonight. Nothing official. The board preview went well, Celeste. 2 of the 3 members responded within the hour. The 3rd called me directly. This is moving." "Pull it back," she said. A short pause. "The permit I filed is completely standard. It's a coastal aerial survey." "Dominic." Her voice had no edge to it. It was quieter than an edge. "Pull it back. Right now." A longer pause. "All right. I'll call the crew." She ended the call. She turned to Malik. His face had gone very still in the particular way she had already learned to recognize as the controlled version of something much less controlled underneath. "He sent it while we were out there," Malik said, not a question. "Yes." He looked at the drone, now turning, beginning to arc back, and then he looked at her. The thing in his face that had been controlled was no longer entirely contained. "I want to believe," he said slowly, "that you mean what you say. But that man works for you. He booked the flights and the hotel and the permits under your company's name. He knew exactly where we were going this morning, which means he knew this window was exactly when to move." He stopped. "I told you about this place because I thought you were someone I could talk to, not because I thought you were trustworthy. I don't know yet if you are." He picked up his bag from where he had set it against a fence post at the edge of the road. He looked at her once more. "I've heard a lot of people use the word sustainable," he said, "usually right before they build something." He walked away. Celeste stood on the road and watched him go and did not try to call after him. There was nothing she could say in this moment that would carry weight. Words right now were Dominic's instrument. She needed to do something he couldn't do, and she needed to be very certain about what that was before she opened her mouth. She found Dominic in the hotel conference room. He had the tablet propped on the table and a revised site plan open on the screen. Blue Mirror Cove clearly marked as primary development zone, its turquoise outline overlaid with property boundary lines and a preliminary footprint for the main resort structure. "The drone crew is recalled," he said before she could speak. "I understand you're frustrated, but I want to put this in context." He turned the tablet toward her. "All 3 board members I contacted have already responded. The reaction isn't just interest, it's the kind of concrete enthusiasm that changes the conversation entirely. One of them mentioned a potential capital increase of $60 million if we commit to Blue Mirror Cove as the primary site within the next 2 weeks. Celeste sat down across from him. She looked at the site plan. "I told you not to send anything to the board," she said. "My message didn't reach you in time, but I need you to understand that I meant it. I sent a preview to gauge reaction. It's standard practice when—" "It's not standard practice," she said. "It's you deciding we were committed before I had decided anything." Dominic was quiet for a moment. He set the tablet down, laced his fingers together on the table, and looked at her with the particular expression she had seen from him before in difficult moments. Not defensive, not apologetic, but calibrating. Assessing the gap between his position and hers, estimating what it would take to close it. "Celeste," he said, "I've run this operation with you for 8 years. I know how you make decisions. I know that when you walk a site and you see what you saw this morning, the decision is made. It just hasn't been formalized yet. I moved early because the window is real. We have momentum right now that we will not have in 2 weeks. What I saw this morning," she said, "was a recovering coral reef that would not survive what we're proposing to build." He nodded once slowly. "Which is a siting problem, not a project problem. We can adjust the environmental mitigation plan. Malik's wife spent 2 years rebuilding that cove and died before she knew if it worked," Celeste said. "The answer to that is not an adjusted mitigation plan." Dominic held her gaze. Something in his expression shifted not to sympathy, but to a more careful neutrality, the face he wore when he was recalculating. "I understand this affected you personally. That's human. But we have board obligations, partner commitments, and a capital structure that is already partially deployed on this project. We don't have the latitude to—" "I'm going to need the night," she said. He stopped. "Give me tonight," she said. "Don't send anything else to the board until we've spoken in the morning." Dominic looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly once and closed the tablet. That night she got the call she had been half expecting. The video footage, even the brief, incomplete aerial survey the drone crew had captured before being recalled, had leaked. Her assistant couldn't say how. It didn't matter how. It was in the inbox of 3 competing hospitality groups, 2 real estate brokers, and a regional media outlet that had already published a brief item headlined, "Undiscovered Gulf Cove Tipped as Next Luxury Destination." By morning, 2 survey vehicles had driven into Tidewater Point and parked at the southern beach access point. One of them had a company logo on the door that Celeste recognized, a competing resort group that had been watching Monroe Capital's movements for 2 years. By noon, a small powerboat with a Monroe Capital equipment tag, part of the advanced survey crew Dominic had contracted the previous week, motored into the shallow southern channel. The operator did not know what was below the surface. No one had told him. His chart showed open water. He reduced speed but did not stop, and the propeller, dropping lower than intended in the uncertain shallows, caught the sandy bottom and sent a plume of sediment rolling outward through the clear water. On its way through, it clipped the outermost edge of the Staghorn Formation in the northeast quadrant, the healthiest section of the reef. The section Malik had pointed to and said, "That's almost entirely her work," and a branch maybe 8 inches long came loose and drifted slowly to the bottom. Leora saw it happen. She had come to the cove with a classmate after school, as she sometimes did, to sit on the limestone shelf and watch the fish move through the formations the way her father had shown her. She stood at the water's edge and watched the plume of sediment expand and the coral branch drift and settle, and she made a sound that was not quite a word. Malik was there within minutes. Someone had called him. He went into the water without hesitation, without stopping to take off his boots, and he tried to anchor the broken fragment back against the rock formation with a weight clip from his bag. It was a temporary measure at best. His hands moved quickly and carefully under the water, doing what they could. Celeste stood on the limestone shelf and watched him. The survey boat operator had cut the engine and was sitting with his hands on his knees, looking uncomfortable. He hadn't known. She believed that. It didn't change what had happened. Malik came back to the surface and stood in waist-deep water looking at her. His shirt was soaked. His face was not angry, it was something worse than angry. It was the face of someone who had predicted exactly this and had hoped to be wrong. "You don't have to hate the water to destroy it," he said. His voice was flat and very even. "Sometimes you just have to love it the wrong way." Celeste did not answer. She stood on the rock shelf in the wrong shoes in the middle of something that her project had set into motion, and for the first time in 11 years of making decisions, she could justify with numbers and data and carefully structured logic. She had nothing. No framework, no next slide, no version of handled. Leora was standing 10 feet away holding the broken coral fragment she had retrieved from the water, turning it over slowly in her hands. She was not crying. She looked at Celeste with an expression that was not accusation. It was something much quieter and harder to carry than accusation. Celeste looked away first. She drove back to the hotel alone. Dominic had texted twice during the walk from the cove to the parking area. She did not read the messages. She drove with both windows down and the gulf visible in the passenger side mirror, shrinking as she moved inland until it disappeared entirely behind a stand of palmetto and scrub oak, and she was just a woman in a rental car on a county road, with the air conditioner off because she needed the noise of the wind to keep her from thinking too precisely about what she was about to have to do. Her room was on the 3rd floor facing the water. She had chosen it for that reason when they checked in. She had thought at the time that she wanted to be able to see the investment from her window first thing in the morning. Now she stood at the glass and looked at the gulf and felt that logic the way you feel something you once believed and no longer can as a shape without weight. She opened her laptop. The project file was the first thing in her recent documents. She scrolled to the master budget summary. $240 million of committed and pre-committed capital. 17 months of planning, site assessment, environmental pre-screening, architectural concept work, partner negotiations. 3 board members who had responded to Dominic's morning preview with specific numerical enthusiasm. 1 chairman who had approved this project personally and told her on a call 2 weeks ago that Blue Mirror Cove was the kind of asset you saw once in a decade. She looked at all of it. She looked at it for a long time. Then she opened her phone and pulled up the aerial image Dominic had shown her at the hotel bar that first morning, the cove from above the water, that color that made people reach for their credit cards. Then she opened her camera roll and found the photograph she had taken herself on the limestone shelf that morning. It was not a good photograph, but it showed what she had been looking at. The coral clusters, the fish moving between them, the specific, fragile, irreplaceable aliveness of that water. 3 things open on the screen at once: the budget, the aerial image, the photograph she had taken. She sat with them. She thought about what Dominic had said. "I know how you make decisions. When you walk a site and see what you saw this morning, the decision is made." He had been saying it as a description of her certainty about the site, but he had also accidentally said something true about this moment. The decision was made. She had known it since she stood on the limestone shelf and watched Malik's hands moving under the water. She had known it since Leora turned that broken coral fragment over in her palms without saying a word. The only remaining question was whether she was going to act on it. Whether she was going to walk into a room full of people who had every institutional and financial reason to override her and say the thing that could not be unsaid. Or whether she was going to let Dominic's momentum carry the project the rest of the way to the outcome he had already decided on and call it a group decision and live with that. She closed the laptop. She picked up her phone and called her assistant. "I need a meeting," she said. "Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. On the beach, the public access point at the south end of Tidewater Point, not the hotel. Board members who can make it in person, the rest on video. Reach out to the town council liaison we spoke with on Tuesday. Invite her too. And the reporter from the local paper who called yesterday about the leaked footage, invite her as well. Her assistant was quiet for a beat. The board members are going to ask what the agenda is. Tell them I have a site decision to announce, she said. They gathered on the beach at 9 the following morning with the sun already working hard and the Gulf flat and silver behind them. 6 board members in person, 3 on tablets propped on a folding table. The town council liaison, a woman named Patricia, who had worked in coastal land management for 20 years and said very little but listened to everything. The reporter, 2 of Dominic's project managers who stood to one side and did not look comfortable. Dominic himself in a linen shirt. In the shade of a portable canopy, his expression carefully settled into professional neutrality. There was no podium. There was no slide deck. There was a laptop on the folding table, and on the screen, Celeste had arranged 3 images side by side. The aerial view of Blue Mirror Cove from Dominic's original survey. The footage from the survey boat showing the sediment plumes spreading through the shallow water, and the photograph she had taken herself that morning on the limestone shelf. She did not spend long on preamble. I'm canceling the Blue Mirror Cove site, she said. It will not be the location of our primary development or any development associated with this project. I want to explain why, and then I want to tell you what we're going to build instead. She talked for 20 minutes. She described what she had seen in the cove. She described the restoration work that Malik's wife and the other community members had undertaken, the timeline of it, the fragility of what they had accomplished, and what it had already cost. She played the 30-second clip of the survey boat and made no comment on it while it ran, because none was needed. Then she described the alternative, a marine education center modest in scale built on an already disturbed site 1 mile north of the cove. Limited visitor capacity. Programming run by local guides and marine biologists with the cove itself designated as a restricted recovery zone. Monroe Capital would fund the construction and underwrite the first 3 years of operations. The company would also allocate a portion of the original project budget to a coastal restoration fund, a functional commitment to repairing damage done by previous development in the broader area. All revenue generated by the education center would flow first to the local community trust. Monroe Capital's return would come later, slower and through a different mechanism than it had originally planned. She stopped talking. The beach was quiet except for the Gulf. The chairman of the board, a man named Gerald Fitch, who had been in hospitality development since before Celeste was in college, leaned forward from his folding chair. "You're describing a philanthropy project," he said. "We committed to a resort." "I'm describing a different kind of investment," she said. "One that has access to capital we've never tapped." "Celeste." His voice was patient in the particular way that contained impatience. "We have binding letters of intent with 3 development partners. We have pre-clearance from the county on the site survey. We have board-approved budget allocations that we cannot simply redirect without triggering review provisions in our partnership agreements. If you do this unilaterally, you're not just changing a site plan. You're exposing this company to breach of contract proceedings, and you're handing our partners legal grounds to renegotiate terms that are currently favorable to us." He paused. "I want to be clear about what I'm saying. If you go forward with this, the board will have no choice but to review your position." No one spoke. Dominic, in the shade of the canopy, was very still. Celeste looked at Gerald Fitch. She thought about the 11 years about the project she had built from worse starting positions than this, about the confidence she had earned, and what it was worth it for. "I understand the exposure," she said. "I'm prepared to take personal responsibility for the renegotiation process with our partners. I'm asking the board for 3 months to demonstrate that the alternative model can attract capital from sustainable investment funds, a market segment we have no current relationship with, and which represents significant long-term growth. If at the end of 3 months the board determines the alternative is not viable, I will submit my resignation and step aside." She paused. "But I won't build on that cove." That's not a negotiating position. That's where I am." Gerald Fitch looked at her for a long moment. He looked at the 3 images on the laptop screen. He looked at the gulf. Then he sat back, crossed his arms, and said nothing further, which Celeste had learned over years of watching him was not the same as saying no. The meeting ended without resolution. That was fine. Resolution came later. What mattered this morning was that everyone in that room had heard her say it out loud in public on a beach with the reporter from the local paper taking notes at the far end of the folding table. Dominic walked past her as the group dispersed. He didn't stop, but he slowed just slightly as he drew level with her. "You're betting the company on a coral reef," he said not unkindly, almost as if he were genuinely curious about the math. "I'm betting my seat on it," she said. "That's different." He nodded once slowly and kept walking. 3 months later, Blue Mirror Cove did not appear in any luxury travel publication or on any resort booking platform. There was no floating bar barge, no charter boat queue, no photographer's drone hovering over the turquoise shallows at golden hour. What there was a hand-lettered sign at the southern beach access point explaining that the cove was a protected marine restoration zone. A small patrol team, 4 local residents paid through the community trust who rotated shifts monitoring the shoreline. A new program for school-age children that brought groups of 8 or 10 at a time to sit on the limestone shelf at low tide and learn to identify coral species by shape and color. To understand what thicker and thinner water temperatures meant for the organisms growing below, to track recovery progress in a laminated field journal that each child took home at the end of the session. Monroe Capital's board had not approved the full alternative plan. They had approved a scaled version, smaller, more conservative, with sharper conditions attached. Gerald Fitch had pushed hard on the restriction clauses. The renegotiation with 2 of the 3 development partners had been painful and expensive. Celeste's position had been formally reviewed and formally retained by a margin of 1 vote at a board meeting in late October. None of that was clean or easy or satisfying in the way that good decisions sometimes felt satisfying in retrospect. It was the kind of outcome that looked like a loss until it didn't, and it was not yet fully clear which it was. Celeste came back to Tidewater Point on a Friday in late November when the Gulf had turned a deeper, quieter blue and the town had gone dormant for the off-season. She had no assistants with her. She had no agenda on her phone for this day. She walked the rocky corridor alone. She knew the path now, the gap in the chain-link fence, the root-crossed ground, the mangrove shade, and the first stretch of open rock. She carried a canvas bag over her shoulder and picked up what she found along the way, a bottle wedged in a crevice, a tangle of monofilament line wrapped around a stone, without thinking too much about why. At the limestone shelf, she stopped. Malik was already there, crouched at the water's edge, with Leora beside him, both of them looking down through the clear, shallow water at the coral formations below. The staghorn in the northeast quadrant, the broken branch had not taken hold, but the mother colony had survived, and the new growth around the break was already visible if you knew where to look. Leora was pointing at something. Malik was listening. Celeste sat down on the limestone a few yards back, and she did not say anything. After a while, Leora straightened up and looked out at the cove. The morning light came across the water at an angle that made the formations below the surface visible in detail, the pale gold and dusty rows of the living polyps, the slow drift of small fish through the branches. "Mom would like it," Leora said quietly. Not to her father, not to Celeste, just out loud to the cove and the morning, and whoever happened to be near enough to hear. Malik put his hand briefly on the back of her head. He didn't say anything. Celeste looked at the water. She thought about the photograph on her phone from that first morning, the one she had taken almost without thinking, crouching on this same shelf before she had understood what she was looking at. She did not take a photograph now. Some things were better left uncaptured. Better held only in the place where you actually were in the moment you were actually in, by the person who had been present enough to deserve them. She stayed until the tide began to come back in slow and certain, covering the limestone shelf in increments. Then she stood, picked up her bag, and walked back the way she had come. There's something this story leaves with you, and it's worth sitting with for a moment. Real care for a place, for a person, for anything worth protecting doesn't always announce itself. It shows up in the things people quietly do when no one is watching. In the coral frames driven into the sand by hand. In the father who keeps a promise to a woman who didn't live to see if it worked. In the choice to stand in front of a room full of powerful people and say no to the thing that would have been so much easier to say yes to. Celeste didn't become a better person because she found a beautiful cove. She became one because she was willing to ask a different question. Not what can I take from this, but what does this need to keep going? That shift is available to all of us. In how we treat the places we visit, the people we work with, the small things we protect, not because anyone is watching, but because they matter. If this story made you think or feel something you weren't expecting, consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you're not subscribed yet, now is a good time. Stories like this one about the quiet choices that define who we actually are, that's what this channel is built around. We'll see you in the next one.